She was called the next Steve Jobs, a prodigy, a Stanford dropout, a visionary who promised to change medicine forever. One drop of blood, no needles, no pain, hundreds of tests, instantly.
Here, the customer waits for his painless, efficient, low-cost Theranos blood test.
It sounded impossible, but it felt inevitable. Investors didn't see a startup, they saw a revolution. Within a decade, Theranos reached a valuation of $9 billion. Its founder became the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world. But behind the black turtleneck, behind the carefully controlled voice, behind the promise to save lives, there was no breakthrough. There was no revolution, only belief. And belief, when protected from doubt, can become more dangerous than any lie. This is the story of Theranos and the psychology behind a $9 billion illusion. In 2003, a 19-year-old student made a decision that would later define an entire industry. She dropped out of Stanford University. Her name was Elizabeth Holmes. Holmes believed blood testing was broken, not just inconvenient, but fundamentally outdated. Too slow for modern medicine, too expensive for most patients, and too painful to encourage early diagnosis. For most people, those frustrations would have ended as complaints, observations shared in conversation, then quickly forgotten. But for Holmes, they became something else entirely. They became a conviction. She didn't believe the system needed improvement. She believed it needed replacement. Her idea was radical by any standard: to compress an entire laboratory into a single, compact machine, and to run hundreds of diagnostic tests from just one drop of blood. Scientists and engineers immediately raised concerns. Chemistry does not scale down easily. Physics imposes limits that ambition alone cannot overcome. They were not questioning her motivation. They were describing reality. And in science, reality doesn't negotiate. It either works or it doesn't. But Silicon Valley has never been a place that rewards restraint. It rewards certainty, confidence, and the promise of disruption. Holmes did not interpret expert warnings as limits. She interpreted them as resistance to change.
Let me just start by saying, and I'll talk about that decision to transition our systems to the FDA framework, which led us to run just one test in a minute.
So she founded a company, and she gave it a name that suggested both healing and certainty: Theranos. From the very beginning, this was not just a business idea, it was a mission. Holmes spoke about fear, about needles, about patients avoiding tests that could save their lives. She wasn't selling technology, she was selling empathy, and people listened. Holmes understood something most founders never truly grasp. People don't make decisions based on facts alone. They make decisions based on how a story makes them feel. So she didn't just build a company, she built a narrative, one designed to feel inevitable. Every detail was intentional. The black turtleneck was not a coincidence. The minimalist language was not accidental. The long, deliberate pauses were carefully practiced. Holmes did not study Steve Jobs' engineering decisions. She studied how his myth was constructed, and she replicated it. The media responded exactly as she expected. Magazine covers followed, awards followed, and public praise quickly replaced skepticism. As the attention grew, so did the fear. Fear of missing out. Fear of being the one investor who failed to see the future. At that point, investors stopped asking how the technology worked. They asked how fast they could be part of it. Theranos assembled a board that looked less like a medical institution and more like a monument to power and credibility. Former secretaries of state, decorated generals, political influence at the highest levels. But almost none of them had meaningful medical expertise. Their role was not to question the science, it was to project confidence. And confidence creates trust, even when that trust is misplaced. Inside Theranos, however, the reality was impossible to ignore. The machines failed repeatedly. Test results conflicted. Accuracy could not be guaranteed, so the company adapted, not by fixing the technology, but by controlling the narrative. Demonstrations were carefully staged. Blood samples were secretly tested on conventional machines, and only the most favorable data was ever shown. Employees who questioned the story quickly learned the cost. They were isolated, silenced, or removed. Secrecy was no longer a strategy, it became the culture. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the story replaced the truth. By 2015, the illusion surrounding Theranos was already fragile. It just hadn't been challenged publicly. That changed when one journalist began asking questions that didn't fit the narrative. His name was John Carreyrou. Carreyrou wasn't looking for scandal, he was looking for verification. And the more he examined Theranos, the more the story began to unravel. Internal documents didn't align with public claims. Lab reports contradicted investor presentations, and former employees described a company built on secrecy and fear. One of those employees was Tyler Schultz, the grandson of a Theranos board member, and one of the first insiders willing to speak out. What Schultz described was not a struggling startup. It was a system designed to hide failure. Test results were inconsistent. Quality controls were routinely bypassed. The reality was stark. Theranos' machine could perform only a limited number of tests, and even those results were often unreliable. Everything else came from traditional laboratory equipment, the technology that was supposed to be obsolete. When Carreyrou published his investigation, the response was immediate. Walgreens suspended its partnership, regulators launched formal inquiries, and the public narrative began to collapse. Holmes denied the allegations. She called them misunderstandings, media attacks, temporary obstacles on the path to innovation. But the evidence told a different story. This wasn't optimism, it was deception. Once the illusion cracked, the fall was no longer avoidable. It was only a matter of time. In 2018, U.S. regulators stepped in. The Securities and Exchange Commission charged Theranos with massive fraud. Federal prosecutors soon followed. This was no longer a question of innovation or ambition. It was a question of truth. Investigators examined years of claims, demonstrations, and investor statements. They compared what had been promised with what had actually been delivered. The gap was impossible to explain away. Patients had received inaccurate results. Doctors had made decisions based on unreliable data, and investors had been misled on a massive scale. Holmes maintained her innocence. She described herself as a visionary who had simply moved too fast, someone punished for trying to change the world. But in court, belief was no longer enough. Stories were replaced by documents. Promises were replaced by evidence. In January 2022, the jury reached its verdict: guilty, 4 counts of fraud. Later that year, the sentence was delivered. More than 11 years in federal prison and hundreds of millions of dollars in restitution. Theranos shut down completely. No product, no technology, no legacy, only consequences. So how did all of this happen? Not just the failure of a company, but the collapse of belief on such a massive scale. The answer is uncomfortable, because humans don't make decisions based on logic alone. They make decisions based on emotion. Elizabeth Holmes benefited from what psychologists call the halo effect, when confidence is mistaken for competence, and vision is confused with ability. She also benefited from authority bias, when powerful names replace independent verification, when trust is borrowed instead of earned, and from repetition. A story told often enough eventually stops sounding like a lie. But above all, Theranos succeeded because it offered something people desperately wanted: hope. Hope for painless testing, hope for early detection, hope that technology could solve what reality could not. But hope becomes dangerous when it is protected from doubt. Theranos promised to save lives. Instead, it exposed a system addicted to belief. Innovation without truth is illusion. Vision without verification is risk. Theranos did not fail because the science was impossible. It failed because no one wanted to stop believing. This was Theranos, and this was the psychology of a $9 billion illusion. This is Rise and Reason Studios. We explore the stories behind power, capital, and collapse.